Welcome back to News at Prime. The South African National Roads Agency, Sanral, is re-advertising 86 road construction tenders that were previously halted because stakeholders challenged the agency's preferential procurement policy scoring system. Now, the tenders are valued at 7.2 billion rand and will come in handy for an industry that's been starved for major projects. Sanral says the reissue comes after it consulted concerned industry stakeholders on the tender process. It now plans to fast-track the projects with deadlines for tenders now on the 14th of December. We're now joined by Reginald Demana, Sanral's Chief Executive Officer. Reginald, looking at this particular process, you've now consulted the rest of the industry. This tender process was, of course, delayed by contentions around Sanral's new preferential procurement policy. Now that you've spoken with the rest of the industry, what have you decided?
Yes, good evening to you and the viewers at home. Certainly yesterday was a great milestone for Sanral, the road construction industry as well as the South African economy. We have put up an interim preferential procurement policy. Following the consultation period, the board adopted that on Tuesday night. The team worked through the entire day until around midnight to get 86 tenders to the value of 7.2 billion. And closing on 14th December. This is the first batch of tenders. We still intend rolling out more tenders, and by the end of March, we want to have had 177 tenders advertised to a total value of about 28 billion, really to revive construction sector, as well as for Sanral to continue with its service delivery on the roadside.
And then looking at this particular procurement process, how different is it than the initial PPP that you were trying to pass earlier?
In the initial PPP, we had quite a number of elements, specific goals, which were part of the evaluation criteria. So you have your typical scorecard. We also wanted to look at black ownership, and we also had subcontracting as part of the evaluation criteria. We have now removed subcontracting and black ownership. We have gone back to simply the B scorecard type of criteria. That's what we have been using prior to the policy we withdrew. And we think that that's where people are aligned. People are happy with that. Subcontracting becomes a contract of condition instead of an evaluation criteria.
So it's going back to that 30% procurement process that you had before?
Pretty much doing that for now as on an interim basis, really. And we will then be consulting on a replacement policy, which will bring in elements of specific goals that were there before. But of course, the level at which we'll bring them in will depend on consultation. We are also watching in parallel the developments in Parliament with the National Treasury's Public Procurement Bill, which will also inform how SOEs can frame their procurement policy going forward.
And looking at the stakeholders that you spoke to, are you singing from the same hymn sheet with the likes of H&I Construction and WPHO who wanted to take you to court to halt the initial PPP process?
Yes, we certainly are. In order to settle some of the cases that were already on the go, to withdraw them formally. As part of the settlements, we offered that this is what we will do. So we pretty much aligned with those stakeholders that were in litigation with us or against us.
And Reginald, are you confident that all bidding partners, large and medium tier constructors, will have a fair bidding chance, especially because the turnaround time is so short in 14 days? It is the 30th of November and that deadline is on the 14th of December. So larger companies, one would imagine, would have the firepower to turn around those sort of bids, while smaller ones might even miss that deadline.
A very fair question. We were very careful in selecting the type of tenders we wanted to prioritize. And really, we're looking at your typical consulting engineering tenders, very less complex type of tenders. We're also looking at reseal projects. This is where you're really doing reseal surfaces on the tar roads. The major construction tenders will only close in January. So we were quite selective in what we will do, what we will close on the 14th, so that we give people a fair chance to compete. Also, we only targeted those tenders that were already out in the market for an extended period, some even for months out in the market before we cancel them. So people are quite familiar already with the content, and they are the less complex tenders that we are targeting to close early.
Are you not concerned that an industry then starved for large projects to recoup some of the funds they've lost during the delay might want to tender for bigger projects, and then with the smaller ones you don't have competitive pricing?
I don't think so. I mean, it's always a risk that can happen, but clearly the sort of tenders that are out there will attract a sizable number of players, the mid-sized players that will come into the market. That's also good for diversity and inclusivity in the sector. And the big guys, if they so choose to only wait for the major contracts, construction works that will close in January and onwards, that's also good. Because really what we like to have is a mix. It's a mixture of small to medium players doing some of the work, doing smaller, less complex work, and the major guys looking at complex tenders to do that, because you really need to start bringing up the small guys. There's a lot of work in South Africa that we need to do, so we will welcome that development where smaller players are coming in numbers into the Sanral projects.
Will the tenders be open for foreign-owned construction businesses, and in that regard, what procurement processes affect them?
Well, at Sanral, an open tender process is really that. It's open, it's not restricted to anyone. Having said that, the minimum requirements are that you must be registered on the National Treasury's CSD. You must comply with local legislation in terms of empowerment, in terms of SARS, tax compliance, all of those things. Once you clear the administrative compliance issues, then you are able to tender. If not, you don't tender. But we are not restricting it to any market, because we are not allowed to by law.
Well, the Sanral opening the tender process for constructors and closing it on the 14th of December, so quite a short time for them to bid there. We now, of course, we're joined by Reginald Demana. Thank you for joining us on Newsroom. He's, of course, Sanral's Chief Executive Officer.